Hi everyone, I hope you're all doing really well and welcome back to the final part of this Flamingo tutorial. The final part if we don't do a background, but I think I'll leave that up to you because I'm still sort of undecided as to whether or not to do a background. Even if I do, I think I'll just keep it really subtle. But yeah, I think I'll finish this part and then we've got the whole flamingo completed then. And then we can decide whether or not to do a background, because I feel like some of you might want to push yourself and try a background and some of you might like it as it is. So I'll leave it up to you, so do let me know what you'd prefer. So what I'm going to do as usual is just start by using my eraser to just erase this section that we've got left, so all these lines are a lot fainter so we can't see them underneath our drawing. So as usual, I'm going to start with the pan pastels. So what I'm going to do first is just get a scrap piece of paper and just sort of rub off all the excess pigment from the previous part that it still might have left on. That's looking a lot cleaner now. So once you have pretty much cleaned your sponge and there's not much pigment left on it, then you want to start as usual with the permanent red tint, which is the palest pink colour that I've got, and just dab a little bit of that on the back of your sponge. And then, as I've done before, you just want to start by kind of outlining some of these main shapes and kind of breaking down all these feathers so we can visualise where they all are, start mapping in that colour, that shadow, and just giving the section that we've got left just a little bit more structure. Well, a lot more structure because we've not even started yet. But yeah, basically go along all these initial outlines first, I'd say, and then fill in your shadows later, or kind of once you're happy with what you've sort of mapped out in terms of the shape. And there's a lot more blue going on in this section as well. All the feathers on the right hand side of the flamingo are quite blue. I don't know if it's just because they're in the shadows or whether, you know, the background is sort of reflecting back onto those feathers. But yeah, still I'm starting with the permanent red tints for now. So where those feathers are very blue, I'm going to try and just leave them as they are for now. You don't want to really go in with the pink if you can help it. For these like smaller, fluffy, delicate feathers, sort of here and here, you want to apply your pigment doing like small circular motions to sort of replicate that texture in a way. And then, to be honest, I think the rest of those feathers are blue. So I'm going to leave that there with the permanent red tint. And I'm going to go in now with the pearlescent red, which is slightly darker. And just apply this where those feathers look most pink and vibrant. And then I'm also going to use the magenta tint, which is this one that's completely smashed. And this is more of a lilac-y colour that I've used throughout the Flamingo. So I'm going to use this just a little bit, just to add like a tiny bit and tap off the excess. And I'm mainly going to apply this to these like really delicate fluffy feathers around this area. Might just add a tiny little bit as well down this sort of quill. I'm just going to leave that at the side for now because I might return to that one. I'm just going to add also a tiny little bit of the orange, like very lightly, just dab like the tiniest amount on the back. And I'm just going to add a little bit to this area here where that pinky colour looks quite coral, so I want to mix some orange in just to give it that more coral tint. So what I'm going to do now is just turn the sponge around on my knife. So take it off, twist my knife around and put it back on. So now the back of the knife with the sponge should be that kind of cooler blue pigment that we've put on before, like that. So what I'm going to do is use the phthalo blue tint, which is that really pale, gorgeous blue that we've used previously, and just dab that on the back of the sponge and then start applying this pigment to the areas of the feathers that look really blue. Look out for little details like that tiny little gap there, which is sort of where the feather is separated. So all those feathers are mapped out now. I can see, you know, the difference between them. I can see where the end of the wing is. And yeah, we've just got that nice base colour sort of mapped out and blocked in. So I'm going to leave that there with the phthalo blue tint. I'm just going to add a little bit more of the magenta tint and just add a little bit into those blue feathers. Sort of like along the quill and any other like shadowy areas. So in with the coloured pencils, as usual, I'm going to start with the pink white luminance pencil and just add like a bit of a light base over the top of the pinky areas of the feathers. I'm not going to apply this to the blue feathers, just solely focusing on those pink feathers. Just using like a medium pressure and literally just shading over the entire thing. Just so we've got that nice sort of creamy base to work on top of. And then over the top of the blue feathers, I'm going to go in with the silver grey luminance pencil, which is a really pale blue. I suppose it's darker though than the actual pan pastel, so I'm probably going to focus more on the shadowy areas of the blue and sort of using that with a medium pressure, or applying that with a medium pressure, and then going in with a slightly lighter pressure for the paler parts. Just like with the previous part, these feathers are, most of them are sort of out of focus, so it's going to be all about, you know, blending, merging colours together and practicing your different pressure points and knowing how much or little pressure to apply at different areas in your drawing. add a little bit of blue in between these two pink feathers. And a little bit into these like fluffy, really delicate feathers that are sort of a completely different texture to these ones. You want to do like very random marks with your pencil to start creating that sort of texture. But I think I'm going to leave that there with the silver grey luminance pencil. Already it's looking quite blended because I've applied sort of a medium to hard pressure. Next up I'm going to go in with the shade Salmon and focus on those really vibrant areas of pink within the feathers. I think if you do like small circular motions, you're kind of building that colour into what you've already got in a gradual way. Because you don't really want to be seeing any pencil strokes at all really, because you know everything's so blended and smooth. And I'm going to do small circular motions and like random marks to build up these really fluffy feathers sort of either side of this one. Just slowly starting to build up that texture. If you're after a more lilac-y colour, then shading lightly over some of these blue areas will kind of give you that, the pink and the blue mixed together. I'm going to briefly go in with the shade Scarlet and add this to those really red, like deep red areas of the feathers, like this section at the bottom. And press down quite hard as well. Really look at the edges of those bottom feathers as well. Make sure you've, got the sort of accurate proportions of those shapes. Kind of tweak them if you need to, bring it up a little bit higher like I'm doing here. There's like a tiny little bit just up here as well, amongst those blue feathers. Must be like a little gap in between them where those pinky red feathers are showing through from underneath. Into those blue feathers to give the feathers a little bit more depth and to intensify some of those shadowy areas, so it's more obvious that, you know, they're overlapping in some places. I'm going to go in with the Sepia 10%, which is like quite a neutral, like a lilac-y colour, and just go along those darker sections within the blue feathers. Keeping my pressure quite light with this one. And just building that sort of shadow up gradually, starting with this quill. You can also work it into these like fluffy feathers and just build up a bit more of that texture. Doing like shorter, quick, sort of curved motions with your pencil. And having all these little lines sort of overlapping. Same with this section down here. I'm also going to use the light cobalt blue, which is slightly more intense and rich compared with the silver grey. And you just want to shade where those feathers are really, like really blue, just to intensify that colour. You might just want to blend that out with the silver grey again, so just use that colour sort of over the top, just to kind of smooth everything out again amongst those blue feathers. Just constantly making sure that everything's really blended and smooth. Just going to add a bit more of this sepia 10% to this quill. It's kind of like you're always going in with like a more vibrant colour or a slightly darker colour and then smoothing it out with a paler colour again and constantly going back and forth. So I've just gone in with that sepia 10% and I'm going to go back in with a silver grey just to sort of smudge it into those colours behind, just to keep it really smooth. I'm briefly going to go in with this burnt sienna 50%, which is like a really dark pink, and just work into some of these shadowy areas sort of around the feathers where they're sort of overlapping and, you know, that shadow's just a little bit darker. So So I'm starting by working into this red right at the bottom right. I'm just going along some of these creases. It is quite dark, so I'm using a lighter pressure in this area, so blending it out. This bit should have probably been a bit further down, but I'm just going to leave it as it is rather than trying to change it. I'm just going to add a little bit of like darker shadow and texture into these sort of fluffy, more delicate feathers. Just doing like random marks with the blunter side of my pencil. Kind of overlapping curved lines that are flicking sort of all over the place. A bit like we'd do with fur, really. I'm going to just use a little bit of the Herculaneum red, which is that like corally peachy tone, and just work that a little bit into these pinky feathers as well. I'm adding a light layer into some of these up here, just to keep the colour quite subtle. Into these areas as well, I'm just going to go in with the Warm Earth 40%. Hello, Bella. She's just come charging in. She literally opens the door by herself, like pushes it open with her nose. Might just add a little bit over here as well, into this quill. And some of the other quills, just to slightly darken them. Also into these fluffy feathers, I'm going to go in with the violet pink, which is a slightly different shade of pink than what we've used so far. And again, just keep building up those sort of quick, curved, like short motions with your pencil. So I'm constantly building up that like feathery, fluffy, delicate texture. And just a little bit to some of these shadowy areas as well. I'm going to add a little bit of the light cobalt blue just to this area at the bottom right that I seem to have missed, and just fill that in. Tiny little bit here as well. I'm also going to go back in with the burnt sienna 50% and just build up like the shadowy parts of these fluffy feathers a little bit more. Still using like the bluntest, flattest part of my pencil to create that really soft line. We don't really want any like obvious fine lines to be seen. Everything just looks so soft and delicate and like fluffy that we want to sort of replicate that texture. So keep using the bluntest side of your pencil. I'm going to just add a little bit more of the sepia 10% and just increase these shadows down here where the blue feathers are. So we're just kind of tweaking everything at this point. We are pretty much finished with it. Just making sure that contrast is definitely there. might just add a little bit of the Anthraquinone Carmine just to this bottom right hand section, just to build up the intensity of those reds. And this is more like a rose red, like it's more of a pinky red, so it's going to blend really nicely with the colours we've got down so far. And I'm going in straight away with a hard pressure just to make sure it's as vibrant as it can be, as well as smoothing out any remaining grainy texture from the paper. And then I'm going to also go back in with the shade Scarlet, which is the other shade of red. And again, just do kind of the same thing, mix the two together. Next, I'm going to go in with the shade Salmon again and just work into this section here, just smoothing out what's left of that grainy texture. Make sure you're really squashing down the tooth of the paper. Obviously, depending on what paper you're working on. This is why I love working on Fabriano paper, because the amount of layers that it can hold is just amazing, especially when you're working on something realistic. All these like little touches of colour at the end really make all the difference. And I think if you're working on a paper that doesn't have as much tooth as the Fabriano does, it won't hold or grip onto that pigment, especially towards the end, because you'll be kind of limited to the amount of layers that you can add, which, you know, it does make a difference in terms of that realistic element. Might just add a little bit into these fluffy feathers up here. Just a little bit along this feather here. I'm now going to use the white Caran d'Ache Museum Aquarelle pencil just to brighten up those palest parts of the feathers, just kind of smudge out any remaining grainy texture and just add some of those like softer highlights. I think I might start actually with these fluffy feathers up here. Kind of do some little bits of the feather from this one that kind of fall in over the top. And then just build up more of this like fluffy texture by doing really random sort of curved like lines that are flicking all over the place, sort of overlapping, just like we do with fur. And then I'm going to go down this quill. Just brightening up those palest parts of each of the feathers. going to add a little bit more of the burnt sienna 50% just into this section here. And then to make that look a bit more pink, I'm going to go over the top of it with the violet pink. I think I might just go in with the craft knife slice tool and just add a few little feathers around this section here. A few little lines that are kind of flicking. You want to elongate some of the ones that you've already got as well. Going to add a little bit more of the silver grey into this feather here. And then just use the scarlet to fill in this bit here, or the anthraquinone carmine. And then I think on top of that, just use the carmine lake, which is like a maroon colour, just to really darken it so it looks like it's kind of coming from behind. Where there's a gap between all those sort of blue feathers, we can see a little bit of those red pinky feathers underneath. Maybe just add a little bit at the bottom, and then I think we're pretty much done. I'm going to use a really sharp slate grey luminance pencil. I would usually use polychromos for those tiny fine details and lines at the end, but I think this is actually the perfect colour just for those darker little bits of detail over the blue feathers, because it's got a blue tint to it. So make sure it's really sharp and use it with a super light pressure, and just add a few little lines just to define where these feathers are sort of separated or overlapping. And just kind of neaten up those edges a little bit. Kind of following those curves along. So I'm just adding those finishing touches, just refining those feathers. So yeah, I think I'm going to leave that there for part, are we on part 8? I don't even know what part we're on now. I feel like it's been a million parts. So yeah, I think I'm going to put a picture of the like where we're at now of the whole thing on Patreon, and then you can let me know in the comments if you'd like me to draw in the background. Obviously I will do it quite subtle. I'm not going to do it as vibrant as it is in the reference photo, because it is quite kind of in your face, very overpowering, and I want the main focus and attention to be on all this like gorgeous work that we've spent so many hours building up. But with the background being blue, I think it will actually, you know, enhance what we've done, because blue makes oranges really stand out. So I feel like they'll complement each other really well, and it'll actually make the flamingo look like it's popping off the page, like even more so. But if I do add a background, it will be in a very, very subtle sort of way. But yeah, I'll put a picture on and let me know what you'd like to do. Either way, you can have a go at it or not, leave it as it is. Whichever, it's completely up to you. So yeah, I hope you've enjoyed this flamingo tutorial from start to finish. This has definitely been one of the most advanced, complex and challenging tutorials I've ever had to teach and draw, probably. These feathers, especially these ones over here, were very complex. Just because there's so many different shapes and like colours and shadows going on. It's just, you know, it's been a challenge for us, especially because we're so used to drawing fur as well. But I hope you've enjoyed the challenge and you've learned a lot along the way. I can't wait to see all of your flamingo drawings finished. I've literally loved seeing all of your works in progress so far. So keep tagging me in your pictures as well, so I can see them. As usual, I've left the materials list, the line drawing and the reference photo in the video description below. And yeah, thank you so much for watching this tutorial and for sticking with me until the end. This has definitely been, you know, one of the most challenging ones, but probably one of my absolute favourites as well. I'll be back next month with a brand new in-depth start to finish tutorial, which might be the giraffe or it might be something else. So once again, thank you so much for watching and for sticking with me right till the end. And I hope you all have a lovely rest of the week.